In this lecture, we're going to implement something called CORS, which means Cross-Origin Resource Sharing. And this is a fundamental feature in any API, but I can only show you this now that the application is actually already deployed. Now, what actually is Cross-Origin Resource Sharing and why do we need to implement it? Well, let's say that we have our API here at naturesjonas.herokuapp.com /API /v1 and so on and so forth. And then some other website, for example at example.com, is trying to access our API. So basically trying to call this URL here. And this is then called a cross-origin request, because herokuapp.com is a different domain than example.com. And so therefore, if example.com is trying to access herokuapp.com, it will be a cross-origin request. Alright? Now, usually cross-origin requests are not allowed and will by default fail, unless we implement CORS, so cross-origin resource sharing. And since we want to make our API available to everyone, we definitely need to implement that. Alright? Now, let me actually show you how this would fail. So let's grab this URL here and open a new tab and then inspect. And so basically, let's do an HTTP request to our API here from the console. Okay? Because basically, when we do it from here, it will also be a cross-origin request. So let's just say const x equals await, and then let's use the fetch JavaScript function. Alright, so fetch is basically a function that's a bit similar to the Axios library that we used in our code, but it's native JavaScript in the browser, and so we can just use it here in the console. So let's say that we want to do a request to our tours API like this. Alright, so if we try this now, let's see what we get. And indeed, we get the error that trying to access this path here from this other origin has been blocked by the CORS policy. And so that is exactly what I said before. So that by default, a cross-origin request will always be blocked. Now, by the way, this only applies to requests made from the browser. For example, using the fetch API here or something like the Axios library that we used in our code. And so that means that from the server, we will always be able to make cross-origin requests without any problems. So there are no restrictions on the server, but really only on the browser for security reasons, basically. Oh, and also, in order to be considered cross-origin, a request might come from a different domain, so just as we saw in our first example here, but also a different subdomain, a different protocol, or even a different port is considered a cross-origin request. So for example, if we had api.naters.com for our API and would then do a request from naters.com, that would then also be considered a cross-origin request and would fail. Okay? But again, since we want to allow other websites to basically access our API, let's now implement cross-origin resource sharing. Alright? And so we do that once more by installing an npm package. So npm install and simply CORS. Then here we require that package. And once again, this CORS here is a very simple middleware function that we now need to use for our application. Alright, so let's do that here. And why not do it right here at the top? So let's say implement CORS. And so app.use and then call CORS, which in turn will return a middleware function, which is then going to add a couple of different headers to our response. And since all this middleware function here does is to basically add some specific headers, maybe you're thinking why we are using yet another npm package. Well, let's just actually take a look at the code of this package. So GitHub CORS. So once more, that's usually how I find documentation or the source code itself for my packages. And so let's go here into lib, which usually means library. And then all we really have here is this index.js. And so you see that here is all the code. And basically what you see here is that it simply adds this header here with the value of basically everything to the headers. All right. So then you have a couple of other headers: access control, allow methods, allow credentials, and that's for different cases. All right. But so you see that it's really just all about headers here. So yeah, maybe we could just add these headers by ourselves, but why would we actually do that? I mean, we could, of course, in order to fully understand really how it works. But in Node.js and Express development, in a real environment, you usually will not want to reinvent the wheel, and instead, whenever you can, use packages that other developers have written for us. So really, we just focus on making our application work instead of rewriting code that other developers have already written for us. All right, so we can take a look at all of this, but as I mentioned, we can also just go ahead and actually use this. All right. Anyway, this is how we enable cross-origin resource sharing for all incoming requests. So basically for our entire API. But let's say we only wanted to enable CORS on a specific route. So we could use that as well. So let's just copy this. And so if we only wanted to enable CORS, let's say on the tours, well, we could simply add that here into this middleware stack. All right. But again, in this case, we really want to allow it everywhere. So as we saw previously in the GitHub code, what this does is to set the access control allow origin header to everything. And so what this everything here means is for all the requests, no matter where they are coming from. And so this is ideal for allowing everyone to consume our API. But now imagine the case where we don't want to share our API, but we want to be able to have the API on one domain or even one subdomain, and then have our front-end application on a different domain. For example, let's say, so as I mentioned before, we had our API at api.naders.com, but then our front-end app at naders.com. And so in that case, all we wanted to do is to allow access from this origin here, basically. And so in that case, we would use app.use and then CORS, and then pass in an object for the options where we'd specify the origin to, let's say, https://naders.com. And so this is just an example in case we had our front end at naders.com. All right. And so again, with this, we would only allow this URL basically, so this origin, to create requests to api.naders.com. And of course, we could also allow other origins, for example, only for some specific websites that we wanted to allow. Okay. But again, in this case, we really want to allow everyone. Okay, so this was the first part of enabling CORS, but actually that's not all. Because right now, this will only work for so-called simple requests. And simple requests are GET and POST requests. On the other hand, we have so-called non-simple requests. And these are PUT, patch, and delete requests, or also requests that send cookies or use non-standard headers. And these non-simple requests, they require a so-called pre-flight phase. So whenever there is a non-simple request, the browser will then automatically issue the pre-flight phase, and this is how that works. So before the real request actually happens, and let's say a delete request, the browser first does an options request in order to figure out if the actual request is safe to send. And so what that means for us developers is that on our server, we need to actually respond to that options request. And options is really just another HTTP method, so just like GET, POST, or delete. All right? So basically, when we get one of these options requests on our server, we then need to send back the same access control allow origin header. And this way, the browser will then know that the actual request, and in this case, the delete request, is safe to perform, and then executes the delete request itself. Alright? So, let's do that, and say app.options. Okay? And so again, this is very similar to doing app.get, for example, or .post, .delete, .patch, and all these verbs that you already know. So .options is not to set any options on our application. It's really just another HTTP method that we can respond to. And so again, in this case, we need to respond to it because the browser sends an option request when there is a pre-flight phase. So we need to define the route for which we want to handle the options. And once again, we will do this on all the routes. Okay, and then basically the handler, which once more is the CORS middleware. All right. And once more, we could of course only allow these complex requests on just a specific route. For example, app.options, and let's say only on API v1 tours ID like this. Okay, so let's say that someone does a delete or a patch request for one of the tours, and only there we allow a pre-flight phase. And so basically only on this route here, one of these complex requests can be done. So in this case here, where we had only this options route, only the tours could be deleted or patched from a cross-origin request, right? And none of our other resources, all right? But once more, let's allow all of them, okay? But I will still just leave this here for you as an example, okay? Anyway, that's all we really have to do in order to enable CORS for our application. And so let's now redeploy the application by pushing it again to Heroku. But before we do that, I actually want to change something here in our package.json. And that is this node engine here. So sometimes it can create some problems when we specify the version like this. So basically allowing versions to install that are greater than the version that we're currently running. And so what I want to do here is to say that it should only install version 10 and not a version after that. So I do it by saying this caret symbol here and then version 10. And so once more, that's using the semantic versioning. And so just like here, which remember means that npm is allowed to install any of these subversions or patch versions, but not bump up to the next major version. And so here what I'm doing is the same, okay? So I'm currently running node version 10 something, and so you can confirm yours by typing node-v, and so you see that I'm on 10.11 right now. But probably when you're watching this course, you're going to be at least at version 12, maybe even 14 or 16, depending on how long in the future you are, all right? And don't worry, of course, everything that I show you here in the course should still be working fine for whatever node version you're using. So if you're using version 12, then please go ahead and put the 12 right here. Okay? Anyway, let's now add all the modified files to the staging area. So git add all, and then commit them with a meaningful message. So implemented CORS. And then git push Heroku master. And now that takes some time, so I'll see you when that's done. So the application is successfully deployed now. Let's just quickly reload here, just to see if it's still working. And indeed it is. And so now to prove you that it works differently with CORS, if we do this request here again, it should then actually work, right? So let's try that. And here we go. No error this time. Let's check X here. And indeed, it looks like there is something here. So you see that actually the response is of type CORS. We have our headers, Well, I cannot really see them here. That doesn't matter. Here we also have just a readable stream, but again, that's not important at all. What matters here is that now we are able to perform cross-origin requests. So that's fantastic. Now let me just also show you the actual headers that the CORS package adds by just doing some request here in Postman. So in production, let's now send it. And so here you see in the response headers that we actually have this access control allow origin set to everything. Okay, great. And so this is how you actually implement cross-origin resource sharing in your own application.